Hello and welcome to the fourth video in our series for creating a custom budget app in Salesforce. If you haven't already, please go and check out the first 3 videos where we did a lot of the setup steps in order to get to this point. In this video, we're going to be creating 2 more flows. One is going to be a known expense creator flow that runs on a scheduled basis, and the other one is our add expense screen flow. So in setup, go ahead into the flows section, click new flow, and here we'll choose scheduled triggered flow for our context. And the first thing we're going to want to do is set our schedule. We can just set it to be today at whatever time, and we're going to run this one daily. Choose objects, and we're going to use the expense template object. We want this to run for all of our expense templates, so we put condition requirements to none and hit done. Now before we create things inside of the flow, we're going to create some resources. The first one is going to be a formula called the DayOfMonth, and it is going to return a number with 0 decimal places, and this formula is going to consist of just the day value of the current date. So use the insert function, which is a new feature in Winter 23. Day, we'll highlight the date and then insert a resource using the Flow.CurrentDate global variable. Hit done. Next, we'll create another formula, and it will be called FirstDayOfCurrentMonth. And this is going to be the exact same formula we've created in a lot of the other flows. And that's going to look like this. So flow.currentDate, the global variable, minus the day of the current date plus 1. So now that we have these 2 formulas, we can start creating logic in our flow. So the first thing we'll do is add a decision. And that'll be called is template day today. So our first outcome is going to be template day is today. And the default outcome is not today. For this particular outcome, we're going to just check whether that records current month expense date, which is that formula we created in the first video when we were in the schema builder, see if that equals the current date of today. So we'll say flow current date. Hit done. The next thing we're going to do in the template is today path, we're not going to do anything in not today because we don't want to create expense records when it's not that day. We're going to say get records. We're going to call it get current category month. And that's going to get the category month object. And the criteria for this is going to be category equals the record category, and then the first day of month for the category month needs to be the first day of current month formula. And we'll hit done. Next, we're going to do a create records within this path, and it's going to be called create known expense. We're just going to create a single record, and we're going to use separate resources and literal values. Create expense, and the fields we're going to set are amount, which is going to be the amount from the expense template record. We're also going to do the category month, which is that get current category month ID. We're going to say the category for that expense is the record, so the expense template category. You can just use the lookup field itself because that contains the ID. And we're going to say the description is the expense template record's name. The expense date is then going to be the expense template current month expense date formula. And there we go. We'll go and save this and call it our known expense creator. And basically what this is doing is it creates known expenses from expense templates. All right, so let's go ahead and test it out. We're going to go over into the UI to the budget app. And we'll create ourselves a new category to test this out in. And we're going to call this entertainment with a default budget of $200. It's going to relate to our main budget. And we want to ensure that our category months get created for this month and next month. So we can see our automation that we created in the last video is already working. So now let's create a known expense, or an expense template record. So we're going to call this Netflix. Its amount's $20. And the day of month, just for our testing purposes, is going to be 25. Because today is the 25th of October. So now that we have that known expense template record, we can go back into our flow, debug, first run in rollback mode just to make sure that it does work. And what it's doing is it is looking up the expense template record, which is this one, and we can just make sure that that's the correct ID. So this is the ID of the expense template record. Ends in that HIAQ, which is the one we are pulling in, since it should be the only one in the org. And it looks like it's going through the path saying today is today, and it's getting the category month and creating the known expense. We can test out making sure that decision node here is working correctly if we just change this to be something other than 25. So I'll do that, and then I'll debug again. And now we can see it's not today, so it's just ending. So we're in good shape with knowing that that day of month is working. So now let's test it out and actually create ourselves the record. So we'll uncheck running in rollback mode, click run, and then now if we go back to this and we refresh, we should see that known expense create automatically. And there's the expense record for the amount we specified on the date for this month with the correct category month related. So now we're going to go back into setup. Since I closed my flow tab, we'll go back to flows. Now before we create our add expense screen flow, there are a couple things we're going to want to install. There is a website called unofficialsf.com, and it has a lot of great tools that other developers have created and then made available on this site. They're very easy to install, so we're going to go ahead and do that right now for our developer copy. The first thing is the Flow Actions Base Pack, which you'll click this link to install it in production. And then you'll put in the username and password for your org. So find mine in my LastPass and log in. And it should give us this page asking us to install. We're going to install it for admins only, and we're going to acknowledge that we're installing a non-Salesforce application. I do want to say, however, that unofficialsf.com is actually lauded by the Salesforce employees themselves as being a true place to get great functionality that isn't available out of the box with Salesforce itself. So we'll go ahead and click install, and this should take just a minute to install. And while we're waiting, we'll go ahead and get the other one. So the first one we installed was this Flow Action Base Pack, and the second one is going to be this Flow Screen Component Base Pack. So we'll do the same thing where we click the link for production installation, then find your credentials, pop them in there. And it should load the same page, but doesn't give us that other option. And then for this, we're going to go ahead and click install. And one way to check to make sure that your packages are installing properly is go into Setup, navigate to Installed Packages. You should see any of the installed packages listed right here. So we have that Flow Actions Base Pack, which was this one. I don't know why the page came back up again, maybe because I started installing this one again. But we can see now it's installed properly. So we're just waiting on this one now, and I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back when it's installed. Great, so now it is completed the installation. We can click done, and it should take us to that installed packages screen again. So now we can see we have both of these installed packages. And again, I've put links to the unofficialsf.com website as well as the individual package links that you can use for both of those. So if you have any issues or questions about those, please let me know in the comments. So now that we've got our managed packages, we can start creating our add expense screen flow. So we're going to choose screen flow for the type. And before we start creating the steps in our flow, we'll create a couple of resources. The first one is going to be a variable called show no category error. That's going to be a data type Boolean, and it's going to have a default value of false. The next one is also going to be a variable, and it's going to be called var chosen category name. And that data type is going to be text, and done. So we've got two variables, and we're going to add some more later on. But first, let's go ahead and create some of our components inside of this path. The first thing is a screen. We're going to call this the category screen. The first element we're going to add to the screen is a pick list called category. And it's going to have a new choice resource, which is going to be a record choice set called category choices. The object is going to be category. It's not going to have any condition requirements. You may want to do this if you're working with the different budgets. However, for this, we're just going to assume that all of our categories that we want to select from are the only ones in the system. For choice label, we're going to just say name, and then the data type is going to be text with a choice value of the record ID. So that when you choose one of those, it actually stores the value with the ID of that category. Now we are going to store some more values from that chosen category, which is the name, and that variable we created before, chosen category name, is where we're going to store that. The next element we'll add to the screen is display text, and that will go above the category, and it's going to be called no category chosen display text. And in here, we're just going to say, if you click continue, you must choose a category. We're going to make this red because it's an error. We'll make sure to put bold the things that are clickable. So we're going to remove these and use some other buttons. You'll see this in a minute. And that one of those buttons will be continue. And then after that, we're going to use one of those custom components that we installed via the unofficialsf.com package, which is the Flow button bar. And this Flow button bar, we're going to call category navigation. We're going to add some buttons for it. The first one called new category. And it's going to have an outline brand variant, but this is up to you how you want to style it. And I'm going to use the add utility and put it on the left so it looks like this. So up here you can preview what your button looks like. So if I want to use a different type of variant, you can see how they look there. Then I'm going to create one more button, and it's going to be called continue, which we reference in the error message. It's going to have a brand variant, and for this, I'm going to use an arrow. I think it's called forward. Yes, forward utility. And then I'm going to put on the right. And then with these two buttons, I'm going to display a horizontal line above. And the last thing I need to do is make sure I hide that footer. Just uncheck show footer so that these buttons are now used in navigation. Now that we've got everything on this screen, let's click done. Next, we'll create a decision. And we're going to call that is a new category needed. The first outcome is going to be called new category needed. And it's going to check what that category navigation flow button bar's value is. It's going to say, is it new category? If so, then we're going to go down that path. We're going to add another outcome, and that's going to be called use chosen category. And we want to add to this conditions, we want to make sure that category navigation button is going to be continue. But we also want to make sure that the category pick list value is not null. So is null false. And then if it doesn't meet either of these conditions, it's just going to go to the default outcome, which means that they did not choose a category, but they did click continue. So that we're going to call no category chosen. And done. So now we have three paths, and the first path that we're going to build some actions into is the no category chosen. In here, we're just going to do an assignment. And this assignment is going to be called set no category chosen error. And if you remember, we created that show no category error boolean, so we're going to set that to true, because by default it's false. But if it doesn't have a category chosen, we would definitely want to make sure that that gets set to true. And then all we have to do inside of this path is now connect this element to the category screen. So whenever they don't choose a category but they click continue, it'll show them this error message and allow them to choose it again. So now we're going to jump over into our new category needed outcome path, and we're going to copy this assignment and paste it right here. We'll go into here and we're going to edit the title to say unset no category chosen error, because we want to clear the error whenever they choose new category. And we're going to say that equals false. So we're just making sure that if, for instance, they went through this path and they got the error message, if they choose new category after seeing that error, it's going to clear the error away, because down in here we're going to create a new category. So next, we will add our element, which is going to be a screen for the new category. And that screen is going to be called Add New Category Screen. It's going to have a text, which will be new category name. It's going to be required. We're going to also pull in a currency element and call that our default budget. Decimal places will be 2. It'll also be required. And then the last thing we'll be pulling in here is a pick list. That pick list is going to be for budget. Now this is for if you're potentially using multiple budgets. But for our purposes, we're going to always be using main budget, so that's going to be the only option in this. I'm just creating this choice resource so you have it available if you do decide to split out your app to use multiple budgets. So we'll use a record choice set for this. It's going to be called budget choices. We're going to get the budget object and remove the condition requirements. For the label, we're going to use the name, and then the data type for it is going to be text ID. Very similar to how we did it on the category choices. We're not going to store any additional values for this because we just need the ID, so we'll hit done. Alright, so now that we have our screen, we're going to do some actions underneath that screen, which is the create records. We're going to call this one create new category. It's just going to use separate resources and literal values, the category object. And the fields we'll set for this, budget, which is the ID from the budget that we chose in the screen. So we're going to use that budget screen component. We're going to say the default budget is what we put for default budget screen component. And then the name, which is from that category name, that screen component called new category name. And last, we're going to also manually assign this variable. We're going to create a new variable called var new category ID. That data type is going to be text, and we're going to leave everything as is and hit done. So now when we create this new category, we're actually going to store that category's ID in this variable. Next, we got to go back up to our category screen, and for this category pick list, we want to say that our default value is var new category ID. Now typically it's going to be blank initially during the flow unless they create a new category to use. So we've created the use case for creating a new category and using that in the flow, and we've also handled the use case for if they do not choose a category but choose continue anyway. So now we're going to go down the happy path for our chosen category. And the first thing we're going to do with this is create a screen, and that's going to be called expense details screen. We're going to add 4 components to this guy. It's going to have a display text, which is going to be called the chosen category name. And for this, we want to use that variable var chosen category name. Because if you remember, this is what we're storing within that pick list record choice set. Next, we're going to include text, which is going to be the expense description. It's going to be required. And we're going to also grab a currency element. It's going to be expense amount. It'll also be required with 2 decimal places. And the last component we're going to use is a date. And that's going to be called expense date. which will also be required. And for the default value, we're going to use the flow global variable of current date, because we're going to assume that maybe they're adding this for the current date, but it will give them the option to change that date if they want to. So we're collecting all the information for our expense. Now we're going to do a get records where we get the category month. It's going to use the category month object, and our conditions are going to be that category equals the category value from our pick list, and that the first day of month equals a new formula, which we'll create here, called expense first day of month. The data type for this one is going to be date, and this formula is very, very similar to the ones we've created before to find the first day of the current month. But for this one, we're going to be using the expense date to pass in rather than the flow current date global variable. So I'm going to insert a resource, and that's expense date from the screen component. And I want to say minus using that day function. And I'll just take this guy, copy and paste it right in there to see day of the current date. And then that's going to be +1. So I take the expense date minus the day value, number value of the expense date, and then add 1 to that. Great. So now we're going to create a couple more resources, and these will be formulas that we'll use down in use chosen category path. So the first one is a formula called proposed new spent amount. The data type for this is going to be currency with 2 decimal places. And this is basically going to say from that category month that we got, find the spent amount, and we're going to add, not subtract, the expense amount from that screen component. So this is what that should look like. And then the next formula we're going to create is called budget over under. And that's going to be a currency with 2 decimal places. And it's going to store that category month budgeted amount. And it's going to subtract that proposed new spent amount. We're going to create 2 more resources, and they're both going to be text templates. The first one is going to be called our over budget text. This particular text template is for whenever we're over budget. So I want to say, warning, this expense will make us go over budget. See below. And for this, I'm going to create an unordered list, and I'm going to put in some values. So I'm going to say expense amount, and then for this expense amount, I'm going to use that expense amount. For some reason it makes you do that twice when you click. It has the expense amount there. Then I want to say this month's var chosen category name budget, and I want to use the budgeted amount from that get category month. One thing about these particular values is you do want to put in like a $ if you want to see the dollar value there. This whenever you do a get records for a particular field, it doesn't automatically put that for currency fields. Now I'll say already spent amount, and that's going to be get category month and the spent amount. Again, add that $. Then we're going to say, what's the new spent amount? If we decide to go forward with this transaction, it's going to be the proposed new spent amount. And then the over budget value is that budget over under formula. Here we go. So this particular one, I want to make bold and red. And for these other values, I'm just going to make them bold. All right. So now we're gonna copy this because we're gonna use this as sort of a template for our other text template. So a template for a template. We'll click done. Make sure you have that in copy. Do a new resource, and that text template is going to be called our under budget text. And this is our happy path, making sure that we have enough budget. So we're going to edit this a little bit. Instead of saying warning, this will make us go under budget or over budget. We're going to say, great, it's within our budget. And then we're going to say, see the details below and confirm. Actually, we're going to say, click confirm. Make that bold. And so for this, it's going to use pretty much all of these exact same ones, but instead of saying over budget, we're going to say remaining budget. We're not going to make this red because we don't need to worry about it being over budget because they're not going to see this unless it's under budget. So here we go. This looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and hit done. Now we're going to add our confirmation screen. So this is going to be a screen component called confirmation screen. We're going to display some text, and it's going to be called the over budget display text, which I suppose if you wanted to, you could have put that text template directly in here and built it out right there. But I prefer to use those things as resources. That way I can change them in one place and not have to worry about changing them in others. And for this, I want to display that over budget text template. Now I'm going to use another display text, and this will be the under budget display text. And for that, I'll use the text template that I created for under budget. And so now that we have these two, I'm going to make them only visible under certain conditions. So the only reason I want to put an over budget display text is when that budget over under currency equals less than 0. That way, whenever this budget over under is negative, showing us that we are over budget for the proposed expense, it'll show this display text rather than this one. And then now for component visibility, I'll do that same thing, but go the opposite direction with budget over under greater than or equal to 0. Because we're going to still show the under budget text even if we're using all of our available budget. Though you might want to adjust that a little bit depending on if you think hitting 0 is acceptable or not. And then the last thing we're going to add to this screen component is another flow button bar. So before we configure these, we'll go ahead and hide our footer. And we're going to call this our confirmation buttons. We're going to add a button and call it abandon. Now this is going to be a destructive button, and it's going to have a cancel file request, so something like that. So it looks like, oh yeah, we're canceling this, we're deleting it. And we'll keep that on the left-hand side. And for this button, we're going to say confirm. That's going to be a success button. And for the icon, we'll use this cart. Very fitting for our budget app. For this, I'm going to do the same thing with displaying some horizontal lines above, but everything else I'm going to keep the same. So we're just about finished, and underneath the confirmation screen, we're going to add another decision. And that decision is going to be called confirm or abandon with a question mark. The first one is going to be confirm, and that is just going to check whether that confirmation button's value is equal to confirm. And we're going to assume that if they didn't use confirm, they used abandon because they have no other options for navigation. And then underneath the confirm outcome, we're going to do a create records. And this create records is going to be called create expense. And it's going to use separate resources and literal values for the expense object. And we're going to fill in all the things about an expense based on what we've collected. So the amount is going to be that expense amount. The category is going to be that category we chose. And if you could tell, I'm using Tab and Alt-Tab to navigate through these fields. Just makes it a little easier than clicking. So we're going to say the category month is going to be that get category month ID. And then the description is that expense description. And last, we're going to do the expense date, which is that expense date we chose. And done. So one last thing we need to do is, and this I guess I forgot, we need to make sure to connect this back up to our original screen. So I'm just going to connect to element and connect it to the category screen. So don't forget to do that, otherwise you'll never end up being able to use your new categories that you create. So we'll save this, and we'll call this add expense. We'll say this allows users to add expense records and create new categories to use for those expense records if necessary. Awesome. Now there's one last thing I believe I forgot, and that's in this category screen. We want to make sure to put this under component visibility. So you remember we have that Boolean, the show, no category error. We want to make sure that this only shows when it's equal to true. So I know we didn't do that before, just make sure you do that before you actually test the flow. And you can save it again. So now let's go ahead and test it out. I'm going to go ahead and click run. And it'll allow me to choose my categories. So I've got that entertainment category I created earlier. Let's go ahead and use that. And I'm going to say this is movies date or movie date. And that expense amount, say, was $30. And it happened earlier this month. So here what I'm looking at is I'm seeing the expense amount is $30. This month's entertainment budget is $200. We've already spent $20 out of that, if you remember the Netflix known expense that we created. We see our new spent amount will then be $50, so 20 plus 30 is $50. And last but not least, we have that remaining budget, which is showing us how much we have remaining if we do click confirm. So I'm going to say, cool, that's good, let's confirm it. Now let's test out and see what happens when we're over budget. So I'm going to choose entertainment again, and I'm going to call this concert. And let's say this concert was like very, very expensive for like the tickets for my entire family were something like $500. When I click next, now you notice it says, warning, this expense will make us go over budget. And it tells us how over we are with the budget. So we're spending $350 over the expected entertainment budget. So for that, I'm going to say, yeah, no thanks, let's just abandon. And it goes back to the top of the flow. So before we test out the new category, let's make sure that it's working to ensure that a category is filled out and it shows us that error message. So if I click continue without choosing a category, you'll notice it goes right back into this screen, but it shows that error message. So from there, I'll say, okay, yeah, I don't have a category. I look for this category and I don't have it. Let's go ahead and create a new one. And this one is going to be home goods. Let's say the default budget for that is $150. And it's going to be related to that main budget. So now when I click next, you see the error message got cleared out because now there is a category that I can use and it's automatically selected. I can also change it. If I just wanted to create a new category and use a different one, I could do that too. But I'm going to use home goods and I'll just continue. And we'll just say that this expense is called cleaning supplies. And we spent $50 on cleaning supplies. And so that's within the budget. We've not spent anything. Our new spent amount will be $50, and our remaining budget will be $100 if I click confirm. So now I've got it added. If we go back over here into our budget app, we can see now there are more expenses. There's that movie date expense. You notice we abandoned that concert, so it doesn't show up here. And if we go into our categories view, we can see that new category we created called home goods, and it has the related expense for that $50 of cleaning supplies. And you also notice too that when I created that new category within the flow, it also created the category months. So the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add this flow to our budget app. So I'm going to say App Manager in the Quick Find. I'll go to that budget app and edit it. Oh, and actually one last thing before we have to do, we have to activate this flow. So let's go ahead and activate it before we can choose it. And we might want to just give this a quick refresh. And now I can go to my utility items section, add a utility item, choose flow, and you'll notice that the add expense is here. I can choose an icon for that particular one, and I'll just say add. And it's already chosen to use my add expense flow, so that's good. And then I'll go ahead and click save. Now if I go back into my budget app, refresh the page, you'll notice that down in here I have my flow, which I must not have named it correctly. I forgot the label. So we'll say add expense. Click save. Now we can refresh again. And there's our add expense flow. So directly from the UI, and eventually through the mobile app, I'll show you how to do that soon, we'll be able to add expenses quickly with this screen flow. So let's add our utilities. And let's say that this is for our gas bill. So this gas bill is $50, and it happened, let's say, on the 3rd. Yeah, so we didn't have any expenses inside of our utilities, so now we say it's $50 against our budget of $500, which will leave us with $450 remaining for utilities. And whenever you finish a screen flow and it's added as this utility, or if it's added as a page component, it'll always go back to the top of the flow and allow you to add another expense. Great, so that concludes all that we're going to be doing in this video. Next time, we're going to be creating some reports and dashboards to visualize our expense data. Hope to see you there. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.